And if you blame anybody for the death or for the loss, more than likely you're heading in the direction of negative acceptance. If you can only support creators who provide value and make you think, please consider contributing to my Patreon page the next time you watch one of my videos. Hello everybody and welcome. Today I want to continue on with the loss discussion, but I'm going to go more into the stages of grief, and even more than that, because we all kind of know the 5 stages of grief, but I want to go into specifically the concept of acceptance and how that might look for individual people and whatnot, and why it might be a good idea to kind of be cautious about how you go about grieving. So most of us know that the 5 stages of grief starts with denial, then you move up to anger, and then bargaining, then depression, and at last acceptance. And you kind of naturally go through these stages of grief. There isn't really any prompting that's needed. Every now and then you might get stuck in one of the particular stages, such as depression. That's a common one for people to get stuck at. But when it comes to loss, eventually the sharpness dissipates, and so you will eventually move up into acceptance, inevitably. There's almost no chance that you won't move up into acceptance. Now, acceptance, though, can be divided up into a couple different sections, and it could probably be divided even further, but personally, these are the 2 that I would focus on. The first one is acceptance in a negative sense and acceptance in a positive sense. And acceptance in the negative sense is somewhere along the lines of you've had negative thoughts about this for a while, and you kind of view this death as an indicator of how much life sucks, so you accept that life sucks and that you might as well just wait for death. Now, this is far more common among people that are on the older side of the spectrum, because they have less life ahead of them, more memories and pain and whatnot that kind of cloud their perspective. A lot of the time, as we get older, we fall more and more into the negative mindset of society. So we naturally tend to become more and more cynical, have more depressing thoughts, believe the worst in the world, say that everything's gone to crap and that we might as well just give up. These kinds of things are fairly common among the older generations. And the older you get, the worse the world appears to look. And I think part of the reason is when you're young, you kind of have to be hopeful because you have a whole lot of life ahead of you. So if you end up in this kind of negative form of acceptance, you're actually more likely to commit suicide, because if you're 24, going through massive amounts of grief, and you fall on the side of life sucks and I might as well just wait to die myself, it's going to be a long wait. So more than likely, because that depression lingers to a certain degree, or because you have a jaded perspective now that the death has occurred, you're going to be kind of fed up with life and give up. And that's not really a good thing. I suppose in the long run, there's not any particular issue cosmically speaking with suicide, except it's pointless, because as somebody who believes in rejoining supreme consciousness or something like that after death, you probably will want to come back into the world at some point, probably as a different human, possibly different gender or whatever, and we can go into the concept of reincarnation and whatnot, which this isn't exactly, but whatever the case may be. So to me, it's kind of pointless, and then suicide leads to suffering on the part of other people you know. So in regards to you specifically, it might not have that big of an impact. I do think it would be fairly pointless. But the pain that you cause could be astronomical, which is one of the reasons why I am not a big fan of suicide. I've known a couple people who have dealt with suicide before, and I honestly don't know a lot of the time how to help them, because I'm angry. I'm angry at them for wanting to commit suicide, and you don't really want to work through that. It's not fun. So that's kind of the negative side of acceptance. You can be jaded by death and view the world as pointless and meaningless and, not worth living. And I can understand how somebody might get to this point. There are times where I look at life and wonder about what's the value or purpose or meaning and things like this. But as a philosopher, I don't get as emotionally attached to these questions as a lot of people do. So at times I fall into kind of a hopeless state. I don't tend to stay there very long, as I've practiced on developing my emotional consciousness, let's say, and, altering my perspective so that I become more objective and less emotionally attached, and therefore able to process through much more effectively, because, I become more general and notice the positive aspects of life and whatnot. But you really don't want to stay in this negative mindset. It's not helpful. It won't get you very far, and it's really not fun. And you probably can get that. I mean, being depressed is not fun. I've been treated for depression on one occasion, and I remember the feelings of hopelessness and whatnot, and they are very challenging things to work through. I mean, it's hard to see the world as worthwhile and valuable, and that life is worth living when your focus is that narrow and centered on a negative concept. In my case, it was that somebody left me, a friend left me, and I felt like it was my fault. And I think a lot of the reasons why people end up in kind of these negative states could be or could have a lot to do with them blaming themselves for what happened, or, believing that they could have done something to prevent it. And this includes loss through death or loss through abandonment or leaving or, circumstance, whatever the case may be. So when it comes to getting to the other side of acceptance, the more positive side, you have to really start examining the thoughts that happened during the grieving process. And you have to look and see if there is any blame. And if you blame anybody for the death or for the loss, more than likely you're heading in the direction of negative acceptance, which isn't going to benefit you in the long run. You can go that way if you really want and you don't believe me, but personally I recommend going for the positive side if you can. And the positive side comes when you stop blaming. Now, I think a lot of people consistently blame the other person. The challenge with blaming the other person, though, is that there's always, from what I've seen of the world, an underlying blame, which is the blame of self. So if you're blaming another person, a part of you is also blaming yourself. And this is why you can never really rise that much. If you could get into a place of pure blame on the other person's fault, then you move pretty quickly into anger or revenge, because you're like, how could they, they're such an idiot, and this is usually in kind of a surprise moment, like somebody cuts you off on the freeway. That's a kind of blame that's easy to get past. But when it comes to loss, many people can't help but slightly blame themselves. So you have to examine your beliefs about yourself if you are on the negative path, and recognize the blame, and then start readjusting the thoughts toward not having blame for anybody, just saying this is a part of life, this is part of life's cycle. Things aren't necessarily always going to last my entire lifetime. Maybe this is a good thing in the long run because it will help me appreciate life more, things like that. And this is one of the reasons why meditation would probably be super helpful in the depression and then in the grieving process, because you're allowing the natural wellness within you to re-emerge and color your thoughts in a new direction. So that's always a good idea. If you're going through grief, meditation is probably going to help you a lot. You probably get through the stages of grief much faster and feel the joy and hope that follows death, potentially, if you end up on the right side of the acceptance scale. So you can decide how you want to feel after a loss of any sort. But if you want to be more positive, if you want to see the world as hopeful, and you want to take advantage of the time that you have in front of you, I definitely recommend meditating. I definitely think that you need to keep a close eye on your thoughts, or if you can't keep a close eye on your thoughts at the time, make sure to set aside some time to reevaluate later, because you may come to conclusions during the grieving process that aren't going to benefit you in the long run. But that's everything I have to say today. If you are going through a loss, I'm sorry that you're suffering through that emotional turmoil right now. I do hope that you can find some healing, and I know that you will move through these stages and that at some point things will get better. That's usually all anybody can say about a loss. I do recommend meditating. But I do hope that you can find some comfort in knowing that it won't last forever, that you will get better. And that's definitely something that I've found comfortable or comforting to hear through my own grieving processes at various times in my life. But if you enjoyed this video, if you found it helpful, definitely make sure to like this video, click the subscribe button and the notification bell, and if you have any questions, comments, stories, or ideas that you want me to discuss, definitely leave those in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. So, thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Bye.